Hey, what's up folks? This is Brian from the Renaissance Caveman, and today I wanted to talk about a couple of wiring problems that I ran into during the demolition phase of my dining room project, which is going on right now. Back in the 1980s, my 1860s house was retrofitted into a dental office, and 5 years ago I was dumb enough to think I was capable of turning it back into a home. The walls and ceilings were originally finished with plaster and lath, and at some point some of them were covered with half-inch drywall, some of them were covered with wallpaper, but they were updated a little bit. The ceilings seem to have gone to two distinct phases. At some point they cut into the plaster to run wiring, and then covered everything with half-inch drywall. And at some point after that, it seems, they ran more wiring and just hid everything under a drop ceiling. Now, I removed the drop ceiling ages ago, and at least the wiring it hid was accessible, even if it wasn't quite up to code. But when I removed the drywall and the plaster and lath, it exposed a whole host of sins, so let's take a look at that. Now here's the first problem. Someone made a splice outside of a junction box. Now, the problem with doing this ought to be pretty darn obvious to you, but if it's not, let me go ahead and spell it out. If a short occurs, or if that splice fails, there's absolutely nothing between your hot wire and a bunch of combustible material, such as the dried up lath covering up my walls and ceilings, and the corn cob stuffing the ceilings by rodents over the past 150 years. And yeah, that's totally a thing here in central Pennsylvania. Now this isn't just good practice, this is actually in the National Electric Code, specifically Code 300.15, which states that all splices in non-metallic sheath cable, which is the stuff you use for most household wiring, must be installed in a junction box. Now, this is just common sense, so really you need to do it, but if that's not incentive enough, if your project requires inspection and you don't put your splice inside of a junction box, it's going to fail. The second problem that I discovered was that above the drywall and plaster and lath, there was a metric crap ton of hidden junction boxes. Now you might be wondering why this is a problem. After all, the splice is protected, so why get worked up over it? Well, a hidden junction box isn't as much a safety concern as it is a maintenance concern down the road. Sometimes splices fail, and when they do, would you prefer to have the splice be accessible, or would you prefer it hidden under drywall that needs to be cut, replaced, and refinished in order to make what should have been a simple, cheap, and fast repair? How about 10 years down the road when you don't remember putting that junction box up there in the first place? The hidden junction boxes in this house have already bit me in the butt a couple of times. Now, I'm not the one that installed them, so locating them usually requires following wires right out of the electrical panel and into either the itchy insulated space in the eaves or into the claustrophobic creepy crawl space. I've spent entire days just tracing wires through my house because some jerk took a shortcut 20 years ago. Now once again, this is required by the National Electric Code, specifically Code 300.15.a if you're curious. And then there's this. If you've never seen this before, this is some old knob and tube wiring. Now it isn't a problem just because I found it. There's no National Electric Code standards that say that it has to be removed. Knob and tube gets a really bad rap, not so much because it's inherently unsafe, but because it can break down with age and because of the way that it can interact poorly with modern upgrades to your home. For example, Code 394.12 states that knob and tube wiring can't come into contact with insulation because it creates a fire hazard. Yet plenty of people have retrofitted their homes with blown-in insulation without much regard to what might be within the wall or ceiling cavities. And that's actually the case in my home, but it never really caused a problem apparently. But as I said, the problem here isn't the mere existence of knob and tube in my house, it's the fact that it was cut off and left live in my ceiling. How this place never burnt to the ground is completely beyond me. Now, I don't know where in the National Electric Code it says this isn't allowed, but common sense ought to tell you that it's probably not a good idea to leave any wire bare and live inside your ceiling. It's just a bad idea.